Down to half HP, here goes Bwipo, and Razork is burnt to an absolute crisp. Niski flashes across the wall, Bwipo now stuck in the dragon pit by himself. Vander trying to go in, BTO dives across, but the feathers fly, and it's a triple for Bwipo.
Hello, my name is Bwipo, and today we're doing a special mastery class on jungling. I think the biggest difference between top lane and jungling is definitely in the idea that as a jungler, you want to be playing around your laners, and as a top laner, you should be playing around your jungler. But yeah, paying attention to what your jungler is doing is very important as a top laner, whereas as a jungler, it's very important to pay attention to what your laners are doing, right? Like if there's a lot of action, you're going to want to be a part of that, and if there's little action, you're going to want to squeeze in as much farming as you can. I mean, there's a lot of champions that function well in the jungle, as well as top lane. I think that for me, I think Volibear is a very simple champion. He farms well, farms quickly, skirmishes well, ganks well. It's a very staple champion, I think, and I think that most players that have played top lane are somewhat familiar with Volibear. So I would recommend Volibear for people getting auto-filled in the jungle. I personally have a very special connection to Trinity Force Volibear with the Conqueror, but unfortunately you don't get enough farm in jungle in order to pull this build off, so I recommend going Divine Sunderer, which is still a decent item on him, but doesn't squeeze in as much damage as I would personally like. So all things considered, I would recommend to go press the attack or Conqueror and grab yourself some Divine Sunderer components so you can get that item. Interacting with more players, I guess. In general, as a top laner, you just have to make sure your jungler is happy, and then you make sure that the enemy top laner doesn't TP to your bot lane and ruin your bot lane's life, right? So, as a jungler, you need to make sure that everyone is happy. You need to gank top, gank mid, gank bot, hover, make sure they can push out waves. You need to make sure that they understand when you're farming. There's a lot more involved talking to everybody, and you have to make sure everyone's on the same page as a team, rather than top lane where it's like, if my jungler, if I'm not griefing and dying to the enemy jungler or mid laner, usually the game will be good. As long as I can lane, I will eventually be strong, and no one really cares what I do. The hardest thing as a jungler is to stop doing your camp to help your laners. That's like, it requires so much mental effort. It's like, you're like the little raptors like running behind you, and you're like, I'll come back for you later. Jokes aside, I think that when it comes to map awareness, as a jungler, you need to be aware of when there's going to be fighting in a lane and have a good idea of when you want to be around that lane, right? You don't want to be walking to gank a lane that wants to press recall, right? Like you don't want to have your lane recall or force them to stay so you can try to gank, and then it's very awkward usually. So being very aware of whether you want to recall or your laners want to recall and when they want to recall is something that's very important, right? Generally speaking, when someone's low on resources, like mana, for example, they will want to recall soon. So unless the enemy laner is very low, giving your laners the space to recall is very important. The same as a jungler, right? Like your jungler is low on HP, he wants to recall, or he has a lot of gold. Generally speaking, you're going to want to let him recall as a top laner. So it goes both ways, but being very aware of this on the map is very important, because when you make people do uncomfortable decisions, they will make mistakes, and when they make mistakes, they will get a little bit angry at you, and you don't want your teammates to get mad at you. It's not a good thing. I mean, you have less gold usually, so you're not as tanky if you're playing a tank. You don't do as much damage if you're playing a bruiser. And generally speaking, picking fights is more important than carrying fights. I think that's the biggest difference. Of course, when you're fed as jungle, you can carry a fight, but in a game where you're not super fed, but still good in the game, often you will not have enough damage to kill 5 champions on the enemy team and still initiate a team fight. Whereas as a top laner, sometimes, you're super fed on Set, you're super fed on Volibear, you're super fed on Renekton. You can kill 5 people, even if you are the one that picks the fight. So I think that's the biggest, being mindful of picking the right fights and making sure that you're not putting your team in a bad position. Whereas as a top laner, like if you take a bad fight, just ping your teammates to run and try to kill whoever you can before you die. I think that what's super important is to have your own game plan and make sure that you're good in the game yourself. Don't try to get lost in what could have happened, like that. Just try to be efficient. Make sure that you're farming your camps on cooldown. Make sure that you gank people when it's good to gank people, and be honest in when you could have ganked and when you should have farmed, right? It's always important that sometimes you should be the one leaving lane, and ask yourself the question as a jungler, like, if I was the laner in this situation, would I have wanted my jungler to come and gank? And if the answer is yes, you should probably go out of your way to try.
Thanks for watching. For more gaming related content, subscribe to the Esports YouTube channel to stay up to date.